Hey everybody, Ed here with the Digital Digest, and today I wanted to share a comparison between the Microsoft Surface Pro 3 on the left and the Sony Vaio Duo 13 on the right. Both of these machines aim to replace your laptop, and in my opinion, these are two of the best options in trying to do so. The Surface Pro 3 just launched recently, as many of you know, and in my opinion, I can tell you right now, it is definitely the better machine overall between these two for the general user, for the public, I will say. But depending on your personal needs, of course, the Duo 13 might be better for you, which in my case, I believe it is, and you'll get to see why through the course of this review. It really comes down to flexibility overall. But in terms of pricing, let's get that out of the way right now. Keep in mind that the Duo 13 on the right is no longer being manufactured. Sony sold their computer business, the Vaio arm of their corporation, which means that this is no longer for sale from Sony. You can still purchase it brand new from Amazon. I will be putting links in the description for both of these products in case you want to pick them up. And Amazon, of course, does carry the Surface Pro 3 as well. Retail pricing here on the Surface Pro is completely firm. The best you're going to do is EDU discount of 10%, pretty much a wash on tax just about, depending on where you live. This product, however, because of the discontinuation, because of that sale of the computer arm, this is far more heavily discounted. In fact, you're going to see, in some cases, the i5 version going for $1,000 or less, the i7 version going for a little bit more. And this machine, which is the i7 with 8 gigs of RAM, of course, again, both of these sporting low voltage i5 for the Surface Pro 3, i7 for the the Duo 13, but they're both 4th gen Haswell low voltage processors. So performance is really on par, as basically is graphics performance as well, because they both share the same graphics chipset from Intel. So when it comes to gaming, you're not going to get similar performance though, which I will get to. But memory, identical. Processor, I'll say, is pretty much identical here. The weight and battery life, not identical. You're going with 1.76 pounds with the Surface Pro 3 on its own, but with the optional $130 type cover, which is attached right now and is a tremendous improvement over previous generations, you're going to get up to 2 pounds. That's still just about a full pound less than the Duo 13. I keep going to say Surface Pro, just because I've been using that machine so much. And the Duo 13 was my daily driver up until the Surface Pro 3 arrived. Of course, as I've been using it, it's been a very difficult decision for me personally, because these are both really exceptional pieces of kit, no matter which you go with. The Duo 13 got some mixed reviews, but that was really about pricing. And as I was alluding to before, the i7 that we have here was, I believe, $18.99 before any sort of discount retail when Sony was selling it. So very overpriced, but arguably in line when you consider what the Surface Pro 3 top-of-the-line model goes for, which still has less functionality than the Duo 13, but it does have a 512 gig SSD. But otherwise, the Duo 13 still has more features, but of course that extra pound of weight better accommodate more features, because the true tablet here is the Surface Pro 3. I mean, on its own, it is arguably the best tablet ever made. Let's talk about screen size, because you may have noticed we've got a 13.3 display on the Duo 13, and we have a 12-inch display here on the Surface Pro 3. The big difference really is resolution, and of course, that's going to be a matter, again, of personal preference. And it does affect gaming substantially, as does the difference in aspect ratio. The aspect ratio here is a 3:2 on the Surface Pro 3, which is, quite frankly, awful for gaming, as is the resolution when paired with the processor that we have here. And rather than processor, I meant the integrated graphics. That's really the issue. When it comes to the screen resolution, even though we've got a larger display here with the Duo 13, because they stuck with 1080p, you inherently are going to do better. And also the aspect ratio is what's expected for just about every game on Earth. So when it comes to gaming, you're going to do better, believe it or not, with the larger display on the Duo 13. When it comes to just about everything else, the Surface Pro 3 inherently is going to appear to be better unless you need the SD card slot that you have here, a full-sized one, as opposed to the micro SD card slot. You also have NFC here, no NFC on the Surface Pro 3, but the Surface Pro 3 has a base entry point of $799, so that is definitely important in my opinion. I mean, the fact that you can actually get the Surface Pro 3 experience for $800 without the keyboard, even though it is an i3 with 64 gigs of SSD space, that's still really inexpensive for the amount of R&D and basically the same experience for the most part outside of storage and RAM that you'll get with every other model above it. And that's because these low voltage Haswell chips can only do so much. As I mentioned, both of these tablets, hybrids, sport the exact same pen technology. They both use N-Trig pens. They're very similar in terms of look and feel. They both require a quadruple A battery. And in terms of performance, they're really a wash. I mean, the design, very similar for a clear reason. We're working with basically the same parts. They both have the ability to open a note-taking app on the fly using a button, which with the Surface Pro 3 is actually right up here and is a great feature. It utilizes Bluetooth. The Duo 13 does not have that. It opens its own Vaio paper app, but the idea was already alive and well here in the Duo 13. And in many ways, I always felt like Sony was doing a better job than Microsoft with the Surface 1 and 2, because the Surface 1 and 2 were always missing some things. The Surface Pro 3 is still missing those same things. The key difference is that they've just made a better product, a better screen, a larger screen, a better type keyboard, which I'll be getting to when I compare the keyboards between these two machines, and also, more importantly than all of those things really, an improved kickstand that allows this to be used naturally in a whole host of ways that Gen 1 and 2 simply cannot achieve. Of course, with third-party cases they can, but not on their own. And the tablet form factor here, I mean, to be under 2 pounds now and have a bigger display and still retain all of the capability, it's just unmatched in the entire industry. And that's why, as I said at the beginning of the video, this is the better product of the two, but that really depends on your needs. But as far as artists go and note-taking, the experience are just about a wash. You just have more screen real estate on the right, but arguably less in terms of that resolution. I mean, if you haven't noticed, you're seeing less on the right, even though we have a larger display, and that's because it is 1080p versus 1440p. This is a 2160 by 1440 res screen. So that is another key element, that even though you've got a smaller display on the left, that extra resolution does net you real-world desktop real estate when you're doing work or browsing the web. So you in theory, you see what I'm saying. You're getting more with less screen size. But for some, they'll actually prefer having more screen size even with the less resolution, because, as I mentioned, the performance is a bit of a bottleneck with this resolution when it comes to specifically gaming. I mean, neither of these machines are designed to game, but inherently people will want to because they are capable. The Duo 13, though, will do better. In terms of the actual screen quality, I will say it's really tough, and that's because I do love Sony and their triluminous displays. They're top-notch. Build quality on this machine is excellent, but the Surface Pro 3 does, again, win on that one, but the aspect ratio is a bit of a killer for me. For some, the 3:2 is what they've been waiting for. For me, I actually am not a huge fan of it, not just because of gaming, but because of just about everything. I mean, if I minimize the web browser right now, you'll see that it doesn't handle content the way I would prefer. My wallpaper instantly is no longer full screen. That's not something we're going to run into here. It fills out more of the display, essentially. And that's because of the aspect ratio. And of course, I could modify my images, that we all know that, but this is being pulled directly from my Microsoft account. That's why there's no issue here in terms of this is as direct a comparison as you could possibly get. And you'll see in this video what you think of display quality, but to me, they're really close. But I do think the pixel density, also the clear type screen, does a better job for most things. Viewing angles, they're both high gloss displays if you haven't noticed, so that's not going to help when it comes to being out in bright light. But both are going to be just about as viewable as the other in bright lighting. And if you didn't notice when I just minimized a window here, both of these are at 100% brightness. Let's talk about battery life, because that's another thing I think people are curious about. With the Duo 13, you're going to do a little bit better. Sony put a 10-hour number on it, and I can tell you they are really close in that estimate. You're looking at somewhere around that. A little bit less if you have brightness all the way up, but you can easily get 8 to 9 hours out of this machine. The Surface Pro 3, on the other hand, is quoted at 9. You're going to see, I won't say substantially less, but real world, somewhere between 6 and 7 if you're doing power intensive stuff. But you're not going to, it's going to be very tough, I'll say, to get to that 9 hours, even with brightness all the way down, at least from what I've experienced so far. It's close, but not quite. So battery life is in favor of the Duo 13. That's another thing that you should be aware of. Also, when it comes to cameras, camera quality in favor of the Duo 13. Even though Microsoft did up the ante with the Surface Pro 3, I can tell you clear and away the camera on the rear of the Duo 13 is superior to that of the Surface Pro 3, not only in terms of actual megapixel count, we're looking at 8 versus 5, but also in terms of the actual sensor. And that's because Sony makes sensors for a living, not computers, as we all know literally now. But yet another great feature on the Duo 13. When it comes to heat, I know that's another question you all have. Both of these machines are going to get hot, but there's throttling here on the left to try to deal with that. And again, that relates to the display resolution as far as I'm aware, and temperatures getting too high and throttling kicking in. I have not seen that on the Duo 13, but you also have to remember the build on the Surface Pro 3, because it doesn't have a carbon fiber build, but more of a metallic one, more like an aluminum. It inherently, I think, will get warmer, and you're going to see most of that heat here. But the design here is unparalleled in the industry, as is the Duo 13. I don't want to discount it. I mean, the Duo 13 really does have one of the most intriguing designs that I had ever seen, outside of what Microsoft put together with the Surface. In terms of the actual body on the Surface Pro 3, it is incredibly clean. You can see the power button up here at the top, the 5 megapixel camera right here at the back. On the left hand side, which is actually the right hand side of the tablet, here we have a mini DisplayPort for video out, which is great for those of you that are looking to drive multiple external displays, something the HDMI port on the Duo 13 simply can't accommodate. Then we have a USB 3.0 jack that is the only one on the entire device, and last but not least the charging port, which is a vast improvement over Gen 1 and 2, which simply was a pain when compared to the brand new experience in the Surface Pro 3 line. The kickstand can go 180 degrees, which is wild, just about, I should say. And it stays in position, so that means you've got complete usability. And on the left-hand side, we've got our 3.5mm headphone jack, as well as our volume rocker. The pen holder, you can see right there, which is probably the worst element of Surface Pro 3, attached to the type cover. And again, another pry point for the kickstand. And that's it. I'm going to go ahead and actually take off the keyboard so you can see the tablet sans keyboard, and you can see immediately how it does really preserve what you would expect from a tablet form factor. And even though it's a 12-inch tablet, it still is fairly light and very well balanced, which helps to make it feel a lot lighter than it actually is. You can see the connection port there for the keyboard. It is a magnetic connection, and the type cover, which I'm going to talk about now, and then we're getting straight over to the Duo 13 for those of you that have been waiting, will just attach simply like that. The actual type cover has been redesigned. It had to be remade to actually fit this larger form factor that we now have. And they did a really good job. You can see there's that magnetic hinge to give you far better usability, so that it does actually emulate the laptop experience, the clamshell experience, so that unlike the previous, first and second gen type and touch covers that just basically went flat, here we have an angled, more natural typing position. We also have a larger touchpad, which is, very much welcome. This is actually larger than the one on the Duo 13 that I'm going to be getting to next. Keyboard is backlit, and the keys work. I mean, the whole experience, I would say, is fairly solid. Will it feel like it can replace a laptop for you? That really depends how much typing you actually do. If you're the type of user that's going to be typing a tremendous amount, then you probably shouldn't be looking at either of these devices, is what I would say, as strange as that may sound. And that's because their keyboards aren't where they are best suited. Of course, with the Surface Pro 3, the keyboard is optional, and I'll reiterate that because you don't have to buy this $130 accessory. You can use your own Bluetooth keyboard instead. In fact, that's what I think many users will do, because even though this is great for fit and finish, at the end of the day, $130 is a lot for this attachment, considering that it accomplishes what a mouse and keyboard can easily do. But because you only have one USB port here, port selection and flexibility is not in favor of the Surface Pro 3, so that's why the optional keyboards are attractive. You can use previous gen keyboards with this. They simply will not look right. They're not going to completely fit the device. They're not going to have the advantage of the new magnetic position, that extra hinge essentially, and they aren't going to have the redesigned keyboard. They're not going to have the actual space on the touchpad, so I highly recommend going with this if you do want that type cover experience. It is worth the money to complete the Surface Pro 3, in my opinion. Don't for a moment think that I'm not saying it's worth it. It's just, to many of you out there, budget conscious, or just feel it's too expensive to begin with, I understand where you're coming from. The Duo 13, on the other hand, is a complete package out of the box. You're not going to be buying a replacement keyboard, unless you actually hate this keyboard, is what I would say. The touchpad, which I'll show you, is smaller, but not that much smaller. It should have been larger, considering we have a much larger device than the Surface Pro 3, but keep in mind that this is not a full year older, but almost, and that does make a difference. This is a late 2013 model, what I have here. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, an i7, 8 gigs of RAM, 256 gig SSD, 256 gigs of solid-state storage also in the Surface Pro 3. That's why they're so similar. The key difference is really just that this has an i7 as well, whereas the Surface Pro 3 has an i5, at least the model I have. You can pick up the Surface Pro 3 with an i7 if you step up to, I believe it's 15 and change, 1500 or so. That'll put you in an i7 with 8 gigs of RAM and 256 gigs of solid-state storage, which would, really be the accurate, exact pound-for-pound specification comparison to this device. But this is close enough, as I've said. And here the key is really all that flexibility and now much lower price point. I mean, this device on its own, if you like it, is a steal now compared to launch. I mean, its biggest con was price point when it launched. So starting up there at the top, you can see the front-facing camera right there on the left side of the device. The home button, the Windows button, is still a physical one, whereas here on the Surface Pro 3 behind it, it is a touch screen, or touch sensitive button, I should say, much like you'd find on other Surface Pro 1, 2, or any other Samsung tablet made on Earth. But here we do have that physical button that Sony stuck with on the first gen of the Duo 11 and then carried over here to the 13. On the back of the device, you have your ventilation as well as basically all of your ports. You can see the power port right there. Then we've got the headphone jack, 2 USB 3.0 jacks, HDMI out, a full-size SD card slot. On the back side of the unit, that 8 megapixel camera right there on the left. We have the NFC contact point in the center of the laptop. Very little branding, the magnesium, carbon fiber finish. The other one is really the one sporting the magnesium finish. The speaker right here at the bottom, along with volume buttons, because there is no volume rocker here. This is one of my least favorite elements of the design, as well as the assist button for computer maintenance, essentially. And then we've got the little docking tray over here for the pen. No real solid integration from either of these designs for the pen, which is sad. I don't know why Samsung can slide an S Pen into their tablets, but even Microsoft at this point hasn't figured out a way to slide. Granted, this pen, both pens are much larger, but a way to actually fit the pen in the device should have happened by now. So that's a criticism that I think is legitimate. But otherwise, that's pretty much it. We do have the power button right here, also to unlock the device when it is sleeping. But you can see this is a much more flexible machine than the Surface Pro 3. If you're looking for something that is going to really resemble a true replacement for a laptop, then I think this is definitely better suited, because you're getting a larger display, you're getting more, I would say, flexible components in terms of the additional USB ports, the full-size SD card slot, you're getting better cameras, and again, the pen experience is basically a wash, because even though this is an older product, drivers have updated and you're working with the same technology. And Trig did not redesign their tech for the Surface Pro 3. In fact, many would consider that move by Microsoft to be a cost-cutting measure. Now, as far as the keyboard, for those of you that have been patiently waiting, one of the biggest cons to this device was that this is the only fixed position you can go into once you go hybrid. So, to me, that was never an issue. I wouldn't have purchased one of these if it was. I like that they built in these hinges on the left and right side. It actually lends itself to comfortably holding this device, not that you'd want to do so for a prolonged period of time, but it does work out quite nicely. And the keyboard is not, I would say, ideal, again, for long periods of work, but it is absolutely serviceable. I would say I still prefer it over the type cover, believe it or not. You can see the trackpad here that is substantially smaller than what you get with the Surface Pro 3, but there's no question, I think, that this is, in my opinion, at least for my use, the better keyboard experience of the two. And it should be. I mean, after all, this machine weighs in at a full pound more. And it's just because this is still more like a laptop than the Surface Pro 3 at the end of the day. The Surface Pro 3, I'll reiterate, is a tablet that can replace your laptop. Whether or not it should is a matter of what you do with your laptop. And this device for me is the better replacement, especially since it requires no fresh investment of money. If I was brand new to the market, I would probably still pick this over the Surface Pro 3 just because of some of the elements I mentioned here, whether we're talking about extra features, better performance for gaming. But if I don't care about gaming, we take that out of the equation, and I actually prefer the 3:2 aspect ratio. The Surface Pro 3 kills this device from a form, design factor, as well as just basically setting a new standard for what tablet computing is. But this, I think, was ahead of its time, as was the Duo 11 before it. You can see when it's opened up, it locks into position, and essentially you can see that they really cleaned up what used to be. You could see the actual display cable coming out, the ribbon. Here it's all been cleaned up. That was a critique that Sony got and responded to, and they really made a very nice machine. To many, it still looked experimental, but I can tell you from personal use and really enjoying the product, this was one of the best devices Sony ever made, and I was sad to see it go. It did have its fair share of bugs, but really nothing else like it on the market. Every other hybrid out there sort of just looked, paled in comparison to what the Duo 13 brought together. Granted, the Duo 13 came at an extreme price, but as I keep mentioning, the price premium is gone. $1,000 gets you easily into an i5 now through Amazon, through a legitimate seller, and that's enough to, in my opinion, bring a lot of people to the party. If I go ahead and just put this down, I want to give you a direct comparison keyboard side by side. This is backlit, by the way. For those of you that were wondering, I know it is light, so you're not going to see the backlighting, but you should be aware. And I will go ahead and open up the Surface Pro 3. Let me get the kickstand open first without damaging anything. And that is really one of the big advantages, as I mentioned earlier, is the Surface Pro 3. The kickstand really does go a long way now in terms of basically using this more comfortably than ever before. And this is about as good as I can do. I'll get a little bit wider here. And you can see right there that the Surface Pro 3 has larger keys. And even though it has the improved hinge design, for me personally, we still aren't at a point, let me go ahead and drop it down there, we still aren't at a point where it achieves the same, I would say, traditional computing experience that you get emulated here on the right with the Duo 13. So that's a key difference between the two, but overall, I definitely think that both of them deliver on what you're expecting to get, which is a laptop replacement. Again, it depends on what you do with your laptop. So as much as the new redesigned type cover helps differentiate from previous generations, it isn't necessarily the saving characteristic when you're going to compare this to any other Ultrabook, like even the MacBook Air or MacBook Pro that Microsoft is trying to take head-on with this device. Sony really didn't have too many direct competitors at the time they launched the Duo 11 or the 13 for that matter. The 13 was an improvement in every way over the 11, but its reception was still mixed because of pricing. The Surface Pro 3 seems to be doing well, and it should. It is a game-changing device, but at a premium price. If you can deal with the i3, again, $799 is very inexpensive when compared to what tablets all over the market right now are generally priced at, premium tablets that sport mobile operating systems. So there's a lot to like here, and in my opinion, it's something that it's all about the user experience and what you actually think you'll miss or need. For me, I actually liked the fixed position here. Of course, I wish that it could have been flexible, somewhat like the kickstand on the left, but I wasn't looking for a yoga. So that's why this was the perfect device for me. And also, I did feel the pen input with the 13.3-inch display was a unique, one-of-a-kind experience, and that is true to this point today. This is still one of the largest pieces of screen real estate that N-Trig experience actually exists with. So I've continued to enjoy this machine, and really performance is very solid. I didn't touch on wireless and Bluetooth, which I will right now. With the Duo 13, this model does not have AC. However, their last generation did have AC connectivity. So with regard to dual band Wi-Fi, I mean, both of the machines will have it no matter what Duo 13 model you pick up. And there are a lot of different models. I mean, Sony was, and this is part of the reason they're no longer in the business, constantly rebranding each time they would get a refresh with a processor. So you got a new model number, which was terrible, I think, for consumers, but it's part of the business with just about every manufacturer. The point is that with regard to Bluetooth and wireless, everything stayed the same up until the last batch that they manufactured, which was really towards the end of, the beginning of 2014. So I would say through March, roughly, you're looking at AC connectivity. Anything predating that, like the end of 2013 when it launched, and it was actually earlier than that, then you're going to be looking at, again, just dual band 802.11 traditional no AC connectivity there. So something to be aware of. But Bluetooth 4.0 in both of these machines. No GPS in either of these machines. After all, even the Surface Pro 3, as much as it is like a tablet in form, it still is not a mobile OS device, so Microsoft does not feel compelled to include things like NFC or GPS, although we do have NFC here, and for those of you wondering why you'd even want it on a laptop replacement, Sony knows all of their cameras have NFC now, and if you just tap it to something like this, you instantly transfer your photos over to your PC, which is a cool feature. Of course, many won't necessarily utilize it, but question answered, hopefully, for those of you wondering why NFC or what it can even do on the Duo 13. In terms of heat, I know I already went over that, but I didn't point out the ventilation. The ventilation on the Duo 13, all right there at the back, and if you do block it, of course, it's going to be a problem, a little bit on the sides as well. Whereas the ventilation on the Surface Pro 3 is much more interesting in terms of design. I would say almost revolutionary in that it does go out around the body. The only problem with it, though, is that the compromise does lead to more heat than you're going to get with the Duo 13. In other words, really, the Duo 13's, I would say, cooling method is more traditional, like something you would see from a laptop, whereas the Surface Pro 3, even since Gen 1, Microsoft has literally been aiming at directly redesigning how things are cooled. And, they've gotten to basically one of the most silent devices you're going to buy. And when it comes to how much noise they're going to make, the Surface Pro 3 is a quieter device than the Duo 13. Keep in mind, if you're just browsing, though, the Duo 13 is never going to get loud. So that's something to be aware of for those of you that are worried about how much noise these machines actually make. Above and beyond that, though, really, both of these are great devices. That's why I'm comparing them. Clearly, the Duo 13 is not a mainstream device. It never was, but now, in its second life, I think it is. Its price certainly puts it in the mainstream, and when you take into account that this is an optional accessory, which so many people are disturbed by, I think it makes sense. Microsoft is selling a tablet after all, not a laptop. Here, Sony was selling a laptop, so the keyboard couldn't have been optional. But really, it all comes down to what you prefer. For me, another key difference before I get to why the Duo 13, which I think I've already made clear to some degree why it's my pick, even though I think the Surface Pro 3 is amazing. The other thing I wanted to point out is that when it comes to traveling, both of these machines are going to pretty much take up the same amount of space. Granted, the Duo 13 has a larger footprint. For me, at least, if I'm getting on a flight, domestic or international, it doesn't make any difference. I'm going to need something large enough to accommodate, a 13 to 15-inch laptop to take these. Even though the Surface Pro 3 is so much smaller than anything you'd compare it to, even the Duo 13 in this comparison, it still requires just about the same amount of space. For example, any gear bag that I have right now would have to have a laptop slot, as opposed to something like a camera bag that I have that has an iPad slot that can actually accommodate something like the Surface Pro 1. So at the end of the day, for me, the fact that both of these require the same space in my gear bags as a traditional laptop really doesn't make them any more portable than the Razer Blade 14 that I rely on, or the XPS 15 that I've been using since it came out. So even though those are heavier, larger machines that are far more powerful and in a completely different class, even though their pricing isn't so far apart. I mean, remember, this was $1,900. The Razer Blade is like a $2,000 machine at the 128 gig configuration, and the XPS 15 was a $2,500 machine at launch. Of course, they start out a lot lower, but I'm talking about top-tier specifications. But those are laptops. These are Ultrabooks, and that's what has to be remembered at the end of the day. You do have Intrigue pens, but how well they're going to fare for the artist, that is a debate that's all a matter of personal preference. I wouldn't begin that debate simply because I am not an artist. So now we're going to take a look at pen performance. I have OneNote open, and as I've mentioned, both of these devices rely on Intrigue, not Wacom, for those of you that are curious. And the Surface Pro 3 is the newer device of the two. That's something to be aware of. But in terms of performance, I think they're really a wash. And I mean, granted, I am a righty, so my left hand is not going to have any sort of favor here, but this should give you a pretty good example of what writing is like, even though I'm making an absolute mess and not actually writing anything, but just seeing how it tracks. That's basically the idea that I wanted to demonstrate here, is just that pen performance is about a wash. Now, occasionally with the Surface Pro 3, it seems like the actual display is not picking up what I'm writing. You can see right there, it passed over. even though the pen tip is actually on screen. I do not have that problem with the Duo 13. So that's actually the first time I'm going to ever be able to say that the Duo 13 tops the Surface line of tablets in pen performance, which will sound shocking because Gen 1 and 2 of the Surface Pro with the Wacom experience really, you could not say in any form or fashion that the Duo 13 was actually superior. But here it does seem in many instances to be a little bit better. Although I think when you are doing any kind of drawing, writing properly, the way the Surface Pro 3 expects, it is the more sensitive display over the Duo 13. The Duo 13 definitely has a little bit more lag than the Surface Pro 3, but they're so close. Again, I can't reiterate that enough. So hopefully that gives a lot of you at least a good idea. Again, I'm not going to go through any artistry here. It's just a matter of personal preference, and I highly recommend you try and demo just about anything you purchase that's going to be this expensive and that you're going to rely on for work and play, or just work, or just play, depending on what you plan on doing with either of these devices, or your laptop in general if it does have a pen input, which of course not many do, and that's the whole point of these sorts of devices. It's to replace everything in your life, not just your laptop, but your pen and paper as well. So really, I do like both of these. I think I've made that abundantly clear. In terms of which you go for, it's really all a matter of whether or not you have to have the latest and greatest device, which Microsoft really has put together here. Of course, $130 gets you the optional keyboard, which is integrated into the experience, as I've mentioned over and over again, on the right. But this is a much larger device, which I've also noted doesn't make it any more or less travel friendly than the Surface Pro 3, because at the end of the day, they take up the same actual footprint almost when it comes to getting into a bag, unless you're willing to throw it in a bag with other things, which I am not. So it really comes down to what you need, what you plan to do. For me, the Duo 13 was the better option at the end of the day, and that was simply because it really does have more to offer for me. When you look at essentially everything that this device has, it ends up being the dominating force because it really does replace a laptop. Granted, I'm not going to want to video edit on either of these things. The Surface Pro 3 is the better tablet of the two. That's my best way of putting it. Whereas with the Duo, you really do have more of a laptop experience. With that touch-sensitive button there that many people have a love-hate relationship with, the Windows button, I don't have a problem with it. A lot of people are worried that when they're holding the tablet, they're going to touch it. For artists, I guess that could be a problem. If you're a righty or a lefty, that shouldn't matter because clearly you can just flip the tablet over, especially since the kickstand has so much flexibility now. That also kinds of, kills off that point of engineering there. But I do prefer having the physical button. I will tell you that. I definitely prefer that. Just like I prefer the aspect ratio, and in many ways I do prefer having that 1080p resolution. And it's rare that you'll ever hear me say that, but unfortunately the Surface Pro 3, and if it had some sort of beefy integrated graphics, like an NVIDIA solution, that would be a whole nother story. Then I don't think the resolution would be basically the bottleneck that it is, and the heat dissipation as well. That's where the throttling kicks in, and throttling is your enemy when it comes to trying to do anything that's going to really leverage the i5 or i7 complemented by 4 or 8 gigs of RAM. And by the way, the 4 gig i5 version was the same structure as the Surface that the Duo 13 sported in terms of configuration. So if you went with an i5, they had a 4 gig model. They also had an 8 gig model, but that was stepping up to the i7. I don't believe there was an 8 gig. No, actually, I stand corrected. I do remember there was an i5 with 8 gigs of RAM. I mean, you used to actually be able to customize the Duo 13, and then as the business eroded, there were only pre-configured options, which is what I was thinking of now. So it's all about pricing. They're very close now. They wouldn't have been had the Surface Pro 3 launched last year alongside this device. But now we are looking at two devices that are very comparable in price. As far as warranty, it still exists, even though Sony has passed their computing business along in that sale. So you will still have a warranty if it's new. You don't have to worry about that. But you're not going to ever see a Sony computer, at least in the short term. We don't know if they'll ever come back. That depends on the company's turnaround altogether, which really hasn't begun yet. Hopefully they do turn it around and come back to the PC business. I know I miss them. It's never good to lose the competition. Better to have more players out there. And quite frankly, this sort of design, I think, in many ways is the type of engineering we need out there. The risks, the gambles being taken in order to prove a point, not just a proof of concept, but a proof of practicality. And clearly, even if this product wasn't the success Sony had hoped for, the Surface Pro 3 reiterates that what they were going for is the future, and that's why Microsoft has been doing it. And Sony did beat Microsoft to market, in my opinion, with the Duo 11 and all of its capability in many ways, which is why I purchased that model as well. And if we go all the way back, the Duo 11 had features out the wazoo compared to the Surface Pro 1 or even 2. The Surface Pro 1 didn't have, wireless display capability. I mean, how Microsoft could not have that, I don't know. Of course, here we do have Miracast capability. With the Duo 13, we do have the ability to mirror with wireless display, but it is awful, frankly. The wireless display support on this Sony model, they dropped the ball. So even though it was there on paper, it never quite worked out. But overall, again, very good machines, very similar specifications, close in terms of weight, close in terms of pricing. The experience is similar, but it's really a matter of personal preference at the end of the day. If I was brand new to the market, I probably, as I said, would still go with the Duo 13 because of the deep discount in pricing. And also, if you were waiting for the Pro 12.2 because you really wanted the bigger screen, this bigger screen, in my opinion, is better because of the lower resolution. Again, that's the second time you've heard me say that today, but it's true when it comes to the performance of what both the i5 or i7 4th Gen Haswell chip is capable of, especially with that integrated Intel graphics solution. So that pretty much rounds out what you need to know about these two devices in terms of what's going to work for you at the end of the day. Hopefully that was answered through the course of this video. That was the purpose after all. But no matter which you go with, I can assure you of one thing: you will be satisfied with your experience. Both offer great functionality, great battery life, although better over here, and really unparalleled experience when it comes to replacing your laptop in what looks a lot more and feels a lot more like a tablet experience out of the box. Of course, more so the Surface Pro 3. Any questions or comments, please feel free to post them. And of course, as usual, please feel free to subscribe. Later.